What is rehab or rehabilitation? My name is Fred Begaris, a board-certified sports and spine medicine physician in Virginia Beach, Virginia. After 10 years of practice, I still find musculoskeletal medicine both fascinating and challenging. This podcast is about the lingering thoughts and questions I've had after residency and fellowship. My hope is to spark discussion, challenge dogma, and share my experiences in musculoskeletal medicine. Welcome to the Talking Rehab podcast. One of my favorite analogies when talking to patients is comparing our bodies to an airplane. Airplanes are designed to take off, fly, and land. Similarly, our bodies are designed to run, jump, squat, throw, and kick. However, for every plane to take off and land, it has to have a runway. So you have to think about, well, what does a runway actually do? Essentially, it allows you to build up speed so that you can take off and also land. It seems fairly simple, right? But when you think about it from a human body standpoint, what does our runway look like? What is the function of a runway as a human if we're trying to run, jump, squat, kick, things of that nature? And if you have a brand new plane, everything is working well, you probably need like a standard runway in order for the plane to take off. However, with time, things change. Parts get overused, things get dinged, and eventually the ability of that airplane to take off starts to also not necessarily become compromised, but you might need certain things in order for it to take off. Now, I think of the body as the same way. When we're young and healthy, we get sick. Let's say if we had the flu, we bounce back in 2 days or 2 weeks. However, if you get that same flu when you're 45 or 50 years old, it might take a solid 3 to 4 weeks in order to recover from being in bed. And it's hard to bounce back. In the same way, it's hard for the plane to just get up or for the plane to just start up and just take off immediately. We have certain things that we can do to make taking off easier. We have certain physical attributes, strength, speed, mobility, but those factors, they change with time. It's harder to get the engine started, building up the power and the speed to take off. The flight isn't necessarily as smooth as it used to be. The landing can be bumpy. Sometimes we can compensate using one attribute over the other in order to get the plane to take off or in order for us to run or to jump. But again, at some point, our physical abilities start to continue to change. They usually don't get better with time. We can still run and walk, but it does require us to essentially find ways to scale our activities by lengthening our runways. I've never told someone that they can't do things as they age, but they have to essentially scale up to it. Long are the days where we can just get up off of the couch and just go for a run. Even in my mid-40s, I feel like I can run, but I do have to stretch. It takes me a couple minutes into the run to actually get warmed up and feel comfortable. I can feel the ground, so I know I can't run as hard. And then the next day, I feel it a little bit more. Keeping muscle on is actually much harder than it used to be. So again, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is the beginning of the end. But if I do want to continue to be physically active, even in my mid-40s, I'm coming to the realization that I actually have to, I have to do more things. I can tell that my physical attributes are changing. Not all of them are changing at the same rate or in the same way, but they are changing. So I recognize this, and I am trying to build essentially a way to keep up my movement, but in a way where my body parts can sustain this type of activity. Sure, I can compensate in certain ways. I can take advantage of certain attributes, because I'm not as mobile. I can try and use strength. When speed isn't there, I can use technique. Now, getting back to this runway analogy, the runway is the place where our physical attributes and our skills live. In order to work on these type of skills and physical attributes, we need time to take off. And that's really what that's really what the runway analogy is about, is with time, skills and physical attributes, they change. However, in order to develop new skills or maintain them, we need to build a longer runway. And I find that in the rehabilitation world, that is really where a lot of my patients get stuck. No one really wants to take a beat and try and work on how to build up their runway. Everyone is essentially kind of looking for a shortcut. But we all know at some point in time, an airplane doesn't just take off with no runway. You need to build this thing to be longer if you want to continue to fly. I find that patients, or people, I guess in general, people tend to be creatures of habit. Making these kind of changes, particularly to recreational exercise and movement, can be quite difficult and also humbling. No one wants to admit that their body is changing or that their physical abilities are starting to change with time. But I've never really met anybody that has been able to do the exact same thing for 50 years. They always have to find some way to change how they move, how they recover. They have to be mentally flexible. The folks that are mentally flexible, they tend to be physically active and happier in the long run. They tend to have less procedures and less complications, and their road back from a rehabilitation standpoint tends to be a little bit smoother compared to those who are more rigid. I've always been fairly physically active, and I know I can physically do things right now. But in order to maintain and if not improve my overall movement, ability to exercise, ability to run and jump, the ability to take off and fly, I have to start taking action now. In my particular case, it's really getting back into strength training. In my younger days, I used to do a lot of pretty heavy lifting, but I started shying away from it because I just felt really very sore. So in more recent years, I've been relying mainly on, boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu in order to get my cardio and to get my exercise fix. But I can definitely feel it now. My muscle mass has gone down over the years, which actually has felt a lot better on my joints. 20-year-old self compared to my 40-year-old self. Even when it comes to jiu-jitsu, for those of you who know me, jiu-jitsu is a passion of mine, which I picked up in my late 30s. And it's a great form of exercise. It's resistance training, it's cardio. It used to be my go-to exercise for just about everything. It's kind of an all-in-one. But the issue now is that while it is fun and I can get everything in, my joints and tendons do pay the price. I just simply don't recover as much as I used to. I would train 6 to 7 days a week and feel fine. But once I hit 40, I started noticing it would take me longer to recover. I was starting to get injuries from things that wouldn't ordinarily hurt or would ever injure me, and I was just getting these weird injuries overall. but I've now adopted a different mindset when I approach, what is a pretty physical sport. But again, this was kind of a personal choice. I knew that in order for me to stay in this particular type of sport, I had to make certain changes on how I trained and how I recovered and how I even just played the general game of jiu-jitsu. This is probably the first time in my life that I've actually felt the potential for physical vulnerability. I mean, I can still do things, but it's hard to explain. I can just feel that I can't just coast anymore and rely on my previous experience. I have to essentially retrain my body because I can tell that I'm at a point that if I don't start training now, that I am going to have a harder time in the future. I use the same analogy with all my patients. You have to build a longer runway. Some people, they don't like that. They want to be able to just pick up and just run a 5K or run a marathon in a short amount of time. And, you might physically be able to do that. However, it might not feel very good during the physical endeavor or in the next couple days to weeks. You just simply can't do that forever. Now, I'm not saying that you can't or shouldn't do certain activities into your 60s and 70s. Now, my personal goal is actually to continue being physically active, doing jiu-jitsu, staying on the mats, for as long as I live. That's really my goal. However, I have to have a plan, and I think you have to, if that is your overall goal, then you need to start taking measures now versus later. And that's really kind of difficult for some people. I've had some patients essentially just kind of quit the activity and be super frustrated because they're like, well, if I can't just, do the activity, the way that I like to do it, I don't want to have to put in all this extra work to learning how to change things. I just don't want to do it. That's a very rigid way of thinking. And that's actually a lot of my patients. A lot of them really they think this way, that, well, if I can't do it like when I'm 20, then I'm just not going to do it at all. And ultimately that's your choice. But I think overall if it makes you happy, then you have to make some concessions in a way that's scalable. But I think it's an interesting thought when you talk with your patients, or just if you are a patient listening to this, or just someone who's interested in movement. What does your runway look like now compared to 20 years ago, compared to what do you think it looks like 20 years from now? My last thought on this topic is maybe the whole point is not necessarily just to build a longer runway, but maybe we need to be, essentially better pilots. When it comes to movement, it is a skill that can be trained and we can get better with time. And do we necessarily have to wait until our body starts to break down before we start to become better pilots? I think I would argue that we have that opportunity every day. It's just whether or not we decide to take it and make sure that we don't let our egos get in the way of it. There's an opportunity every day to get better. It doesn't always necessarily mean that you have to win every day. You have to get a personal best time every day, but becoming a better pilot, a better mover, we have that opportunity every day. Or for a lot of us, we waste that opportunity every day just for the sake of the outcome that we want to see, or for the outcome that we're used to. I think if you approach your movement and exercise that way, you might start to actually make some really positive changes. I hope this analogy works for you guys. Please start making those changes today. Work on your airplanes, work on your runways. This is the time, because there is such a thing of running out of time. And I have seen people try to get moving and try to get momentum, kind of way deep into a medical condition, end-stage lumbar stenosis, end-stage osteoarthritis. And sometimes the obstacle is too big at that point, or they don't have enough time and things just start to compound. So the sooner you identify your goals, you can start to prepare your body. You can start to prepare your runway. So I hope that this analogy hopefully rings true for some of you guys, and I really appreciate you guys sticking with me and listening to my podcast. I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you for listening to the Talking Rehab podcast. I hope that this podcast stimulates you to question your own practice and how you approach rehabilitation. I truly appreciate your time and attention. If you enjoyed listening, make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast. I wish you a movement-filled day. Take care.